Let me preface this by saying, I know what you're thinking. Time travel? Really? It's crazy, and I know it. But someone out there has to see this. What the world will mutate into in the eons to come. I'm coming out with this story not so everyone believes in time travel. No, that'll reveal itself eventually. I'm merely here to give humanity a promise and a warning. My story starts not in some government lab, but in the forests of Alaska. Ever since I first visited this state a few years ago, I fell in love with it. Like the land was a beautiful siren call pulling me towards it more the further I got. That's how I always saw it anyway, though I wasn't quite sure why, until now. Something about the soil, the air, the sea, the vast mountains and lush rainforests. Yes, there are rainforests in Alaska. I don't want to disclose exactly where I'm from, but it's safe to say it's far, far away from civilization. Anchorage is the biggest city here, and while it doesn't even have 300,000 people, it's still far too busy and monotonous for me. There's a saying there, a common idea that's gone through many iterations, but the general idea is that Anchorage and Alaska are not one and the same, merely close in proximity. The way I see it, why would you ever go to Anchorage if you could just go to Alaska? To truly live in the land is an experience unlike any other. But I'm getting off topic. You're here to learn about time travel, not the dangers of living in close proximity to moose. I've always been fascinated with science, perhaps just as much as I am with nature. I make a habit of hiking through the woods while listening to recorded lectures about physics and optimistic predictions for humanity's future through my headphones. It was on one such walk that the idea came to me. It just fell into place over the course of a few minutes of frantic note-taking in the middle of the woods, leaving me covered in dirt and rain, hooting and hollering in triumph. It must have been quite the sight for any nearby wildlife. I must have looked like I'd lost my mind as I suddenly rushed back home and prepared my tools for something either really revolutionary or just really stupid. I live in a small cabin, isolated from the relative chaos of even the small towns nearby. Maybe it's a bit hypocritical for a science geek to live in a minimalistic cabin in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. But then again, who could have guessed a time traveler would be eccentric? I already had the idea laid out in my head by the time I got back that evening. And soon, those ideas would turn into blueprints. Then reality. It wasn't what you'd expect. Not some heaping monstrosity of metal and wire, nor some utterly alien design like a mysterious white orb. No, this time machine was mine. And I don't operate like that. The machine, which I dubbed the Time Piercer, looked just like an ordinary leather chair. Well, okay, I suppose it was ordinary, aside from the reclining lever being 4 feet long and pointed straight up. But still, all the intricate components were inside, leaving only a somewhat conspicuous piece of furniture. I wasn't really sure what to do after the first successful test. I mean, it was probably the happiest moment of my life, sure, but I hadn't really thought beyond that. I had leapt forward just 1 minute, watching the rain outside fall extremely fast, gushing down in an unrelenting torrent. Then, it just stopped, the soft pitter-patter of normal time returning. I checked the video feed I had set up, and sure enough, I had disappeared along with the chair for a full minute. After that, I just kinda kept the thing for a few weeks, too cautious to do anything more with it. But one night after having maybe one too many drinks with some friends, I came back home to the Time Piercer and said to myself, enough is enough. I was going to plunge deep into the future and see what I could find. The air that night was filled with tension, like the woods outside had gone quiet, almost as if the animals too were waiting in anticipation. I took a deep breath and gently nudged the lever forward. In an instant, I felt the odd jolt of movement, but not through space. I watched as the night moved on. Dust swirled around the cabin like snowflakes, and then I saw myself, presumably back from my little foray into the future. He seemed distressed, pacing around the room, muttering something to himself in a pitch so high I could no longer hear it. He began typing something on his computer before laying in bed. But I could see he wasn't sleeping. He looked disturbed by something that night. The next day wasn't much different, but as time rolled forward like a train barreling down the tracks, he moved on, sinking back into routine. I began to speed up by this point, a little freaked out, but reassured by my guaranteed recovery. Days turned into weeks, then months. The grass outside seemed to become a solid green mass. The trees seemed almost like they do in cartoons, with just a series of green balls resting on branches. But then they turned brown. And then they were gone as snow fell in what looked like literal sheets, drowning the green carpet in an ever-shifting white one. The sun, moon, and stars rocketed across the sky, creating a disorienting strobing effect that I quickly sped up to get away from. The celestial bodies then blurred into white lines in a now seemingly grey sky, an oddly beautiful sight in what was otherwise a less than pleasant experience. The snow melted, and the green carpet came back, then the white carpet, then green, then white. Years passed before my eyes, and though my future self was just a blur, I could tell he was getting older. An ever-lengthening beard accompanied an ever-growing collection of new gadgets, some so futuristic I had a hard time telling whether they were made by me or simply everyday products no more notable to the people of the future than a smartphone is to us. It had been decades now, probably even the better half of a century, but I still looked like I had maybe another 20 years left in me, especially with futuristic technology. And then, I was gone. I don't know how it happened. Car accident? Cancer? Murder? So many questions swirled through my mind, and I got the feeling they were probably better left unanswered. After all, we all have to die of something eventually. I continued my dive into the ocean of time, a journey that now felt more like a funeral procession than a fun adventure. After my death, another person moved in. A couple, actually. My stuff was carried away and sold in what felt like a microsecond, like the universe had discarded me without even a second thought. The family left. Nobody took their place, and the dust swirling through the cabin began to accumulate. I watched with growing dread as rot crept through the wooden walls. The nature I loved so much was invading my own home. Vines growing all over the old, dormant copy of the time piercer, which was now riddled with holes. The lever had been returned to that of a normal couch, like someone had sawed it off without knowing what the chair really was, which led me to believe it had broken down at some point. It suddenly disappeared as the door seemed to open for just a brief flash. Who took it? And then, with the speed of a bullet punching through flesh, bulldozers eviscerated the entire structure, leaving only an empty lot in the woods, which now looked far less wild, more penned in. Smokestacks loomed in the distance. I kept going, afraid of what I may find, but also afraid to stop. And then, it happened. Maybe a century or so into the future, something even more unexpected than my death occurred. The chair reclined. It wasn't supposed to do that anymore. It wasn't built to traverse time like that. Suddenly, I felt myself grind to a chronological halt, or at least relative to my previous mad dash through the timeline. I quickly raised my head in panic, already eager to leave whatever future I had found myself in. I nearly jumped when I saw the guns aimed at me. A group of trembling soldiers in armor I didn't recognize stared in fear and awe at the strange man reclining in a chair who had just appeared. Identify yourself," one of the armed men commanded in a voice that sounded more like a plea. They all seemed to be American soldiers, though the flag looked different, with more stars, and in a pattern I didn't recognize. "What's going on here?" I asked cautiously, slowly putting down the footrest of the seat and gripping the lever tightly, making sure none of my actions happened too suddenly, lest those shaking fingers pull the trigger. What is this? Some kind of Russian superweapon?" another soldier asked. "Are you serious right now? Look at him. Does he look or sound Russian to you?" If the Russians had that kind of tech, why would they even be after our oil? Another soldier asked them incredulously, his expression that of a man about to break from seeing one crazy thing too many. Before anyone else could reply, a suffocating sound filled the air. The soldiers, covered in dirt and leaves from the forest, looked behind me and screamed, "We've got a swarm incoming!" before they all opened fire. Chaos erupted all around me. I ducked down, covering my ear as gunshots erupted. The soldiers were shooting at something, and they never even seemed to miss. Every single shot without fail causing something behind me to drop to the ground with a light thud. That was when I really started paying attention to their weapons. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before. They didn't even seem to be ejecting shells. The bullets seemed to change course mid-air like missiles, and every shot they fired erupted into a shotgun-like burst right after reaching the enemy. But for all their ferocity, the sound of the soldiers' gunfire were soon drowned out by buzzing. That's when I saw them. They looked like drones, like the small commercial kind, but they were heavily armored and had a startling degree of intelligence, adjusting course with every little movement of the soldiers. Some drones were painted white and carried fallen drones away, only for them both to return perfectly fine just seconds later. The drones, which I could now see had Russian flags, weren't even shooting. They were just persistently approaching the soldiers, stalking them. That's when the drones all started diving towards the soldiers, exploding right in their faces. The panicked screams of the soldiers echoed throughout the forest as I frantically messed around with the time piercer's lever. It was stuck. The drones had picked off the rest of the soldiers and dragged them off to somewhere and were just passively watching me, almost with amusement. When I finally got the lever to work, I let out a sigh of relief as I watched the drones look confused before dispersing. War continued to rage on for years. Futuristic tanks plowed through the forest. Russian drone swarms faced off against American super soldiers before the Americans seemingly retreated, leaving the Russians to reclaim their old Alaskan colony. And reclaim it they did. The smokestacks grew a lot over the next 50 years or so before being disassembled for solar and wind farms. Then what looked like fusion plants. The world went on. I sped up. Rockets were once again launched, but this time they were passenger craft instead of missiles. The forest began to heal as the new city in the distance became filled with vegetation. I couldn't help but smile. The people that came by to hike looked odd, but in a good way. They looked exceptional, like they were healthier, stronger. Nobody seemed to age. Nobody was overweight. And poverty seemed rarer and rarer. The air felt cooler, like the earth was healing. A fact that was confirmed by the presence of large carbon sequestration machines cropping up more and more frequently. I finally relaxed for the first and last time in my journey. This was what I wanted, what I was hoping for. Utopia was no longer a dream, but a fact that flew in the face of common expectation. But of course, nothing lasts forever. There was no apocalypse, no descent into dystopia. Just changes. They were small at first, like the people with naturally blue hair, which I presumed was from genetic engineering. I was proved right when I started seeing even weirder things. People with blue skin, leafy skin, gills, wings, extra arms, cybernetic implants, and stuff I couldn't even recognize. The growing number of cities on the horizon became larger and larger. People's heads seemed larger, their skulls expanded for larger brains, and their science was proof of that. Animals of all types roamed the city streets, not as wildlife, but as citizens, with arms genetically or cybernetically installed. Each day, they walked to work alongside humans. And then, they all stopped walking to work. There was no more work to do. Automation had run its course. But they didn't fall into a spiral of meaningless hedonism. No, they somehow managed to maintain a meaningful society, even centuries after automation had made every job obsolete. The forest glowed with engineered bioluminescence. The cities seemed to build themselves in increasingly organic ways. They grew like they were made by nanorobots or something. The city lights on the moon grew as well, and the forest became more and more engineered. Things went on like this for a long time, perhaps for the better part of a millennia. Then shit really started taking off. It was slow at first, but increased in speed and sheer weight like a snowball inexorably rolling down a hill. I was on the edge of my seat with awe and a growing sense of dread as I watched the structures dwarf the mountains themselves. The numbers of stars in the sky seemed to double as satellites filled the ocean of night. Giant space stations, balloon cities in the clouds, an ever-rising sprawl ascending from the ocean, a giant metal ring reaching across the sky and presumably around the whole planet itself. And then another, and another. The forest became filled with increasingly stranger beings, things so far removed from humanity. I don't even know what to call them. The lines between cybernetics and genetic engineering had been blurred forever, and an almost organic technology spread throughout the world. The forest seemed alive, sentient, sapient, even something beyond that, far, far beyond that. The cities, now just one giant city that I think started encompassing the entire planet, seemed the same, growing in mind far beyond anything I was prepared for, as did the people, or whatever they were. I couldn't even be sure if each critter I saw was an individual or part of some greater whole. I pushed forward, a growing sense of unease as I feared for the soil, the air, the sea, the vast mountains and lush rainforests I had fallen in love with. "No, no," I cried out. "You already took my life from me. You already took my home from me. You already took my country from me. You won't take my world, my species." I was angry now, angry at the chair, angry at the future and its incomprehensible inhabitants, angry at myself for even coming here. I watched as the world was consumed. The barriers between natural and organic broke. The forest now seemed indistinguishable from the city and its inhabitants. I watched as the ocean was drained. The mountains seemed to dissolve into a mass of perfected nanotechnological structures. Just another part of some vast being, likely reaching all the way down to the Earth's mantle and all the way to the edge of the atmosphere, which suddenly got sucked away and shipped off into space in what felt like seconds before the structure completely filled my view of the sky. I caught a glimpse of the sun. There was almost a fog of sorts growing across it. But it wasn't fog. No. The fact I could see it at all implied each piece of that growing haze was utterly massive. Most of it was an indistinguishable cloud whose droplets were too small to see, likely larger than the mountains themselves. And others were visible, even from there, whole artificial worlds. I saw it engulf the sun for just a moment, before the sun seemed to return to normal. But I could see it was just refocusing a tiny spotlight of energy back to Earth. The moon seemed to evaporate into a mist in moments, its cremated ashes fueling a world I could never hope to understand. An object that had stood for billions of years was just blown away, and all because of human innovation. I was always optimistic about the future, but this? I don't know what to make of this. I watched as distant stars disappeared as well, along with the planets. Even the newly englobed sun seemingly wasn't enough to satisfy them, as they just sucked the plasma from its surface and built an even larger cloud of objects, likely on their own more efficient fusion reactors. Massive shells, like secondary planetary crusts, began to close around my last view of the sky. The gravity drained away as they presumably used the material in the Earth's mantle and core to expand the structure around it. But then, it returned with a brutal abruptness. An artificial black hole for a core, maybe? The dozens of shells of planetary crust finally blocked out the sky, and my attention returned to the city. Until now, I had never truly admired its beauty. I didn't want to admit it, but there was an eerie elegance to it. Then, my surroundings suddenly changed. Whereas before, they had been seemingly designed to standards of beauty that frequently dipped beyond the range of human psychology, as if to appeal to utterly alien minds. This was something designed for specifically a human, specifically for me. I looked out at what appeared to be my cabin and a small patch of woods surrounding it. My woods. But I knew it was all fake. There wasn't even a sky, just an admittedly beautiful cathedral-like structure that was seemingly the epitome of aesthetics. It's hard to even describe, but somehow it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, even more so than nature itself, if that's even possible. It's like someone somehow crafted the best possible style of architecture based on something rooted deep in the human psyche. It seemed to belong to every era and no era, mixing a neon glow with ornate silver and wood designs depicting events that haven't happened yet, and won't for literally geological lengths of time. A soft bioluminescent glow came from vines creeping along the entire dome-like structure made of pristine white stone. The forest below was an exact replica of my home, micron by micron. I felt so disoriented. The familiar and the downright alien blending together into a painful slush in my mind. I didn't want to stop. Not here. I couldn't. I felt observed here. But I couldn't go backwards unless I stopped first. I had a decision to make at that point. And that was option A, risk stepping into what was obviously a trap. Or option B, keep drifting even further into the future and risk slipping into an era where I definitely can't go back, like the heat death of the universe or any other number of potential disasters. I chose option B. It was a no-brainer. That room conveyed such an atmosphere of nope that I dare not stop the machine until that entire structure had been reduced to cosmic dust. But that never happened. I waited for what felt like 12 whole hours at the fastest speed the time piercer could muster. But nothing ever changed. The room didn't even have any dust in it. It just remained pristine for what must have been eons. I waited and waited for something, anything to happen, for the world to go back to normal. But it persisted, like it was mocking me, like it was waiting for me. Eventually, I just gave up. I really didn't want to confront whatever had happened to my world. But I wasn't going to starve myself in fucking leather chair. I finally conceded and gently brought my creation to a crawl, barely even able to tell time was moving slower other than glancing back at the lever and hoping it was an actual indicator of my speed. That room seemed to exist in a singularity, an unending moment in time, like a game paused, waiting for the player to take the reins. The machine came to a gentle stop, and I immediately felt wrong, like I had disturbed something. I sat there in dead fucking silence for an uncomfortable amount of time, just thinking, ruminating over my predicament. I considered the possibility of nanobots in the air, that they might induce hallucinations, brainwash me, or trap me in the Matrix or something. But it was already too late to dwell on it. What was done, and I fully accepted whatever fate awaited me next. That's when a door opened, and several humanoid figures walked out. They almost resembled those early genetically modified people, but the modifications were still more extreme, glowing with a smooth, perfect design, like every single atom had been positioned with great care. There were 3 of them, all looking roughly similar, but still unique in their own right. They looked like they weren't even carbon-based, at least not entirely, like they were made not of cells, but of tiny machines. Their skin had a slick red texture with black stripes, whose patterns varied among the group. Their hair glowed different colors. One was green, another purple, and the last of the group had blue hair, though it's hard to say if it was hairs, horns, or part of their skulls. There were 2 guys and 1 woman, if gender even meant anything to such beings. They stopped their conversation and eagerly moved to greet me. I recoiled back a bit, but the purple-haired woman already anticipated this and spoke softly and compassionately. "Don't worry, traveler. We do not mean you harm. We have created this space for you in anticipation of your arrival, hoping it would entice you to make contact. It seems that didn't go as planned, but forgive us. We didn't have a scan of your mind, so we couldn't have known your preferences or what would comfort you. So we try to replicate your home from the 21st century and placed it in a room optimized to human aesthetic preferences. In case you were wondering, your actions upon returning to your time, as well as your sudden appearance amidst the invasion of Alaska in 2102 for oil, was noted and studied by scientists for centuries, before time travel became mainstream knowledge and was officially outlawed so as to avoid creating paradoxes or alternate timelines. There were others like you who came both before and after, dating all the way back to the 1870s and all the way to the 2370s. You are among the first and only beings to ever travel through time. Some of them are still journeying. They're machines in their own special arrival rooms designed with our best attempts to please them and put them at ease. Though of course, such a thing is obviously quite difficult after what they have seen. Some of them went to the past and died there. Some came back. Some machines were destroyed. Others put away in storage and later found by various Earth governments. But most ended up somewhere between the consumption of the Earth and the post-intergalactic colonization era you are currently in. I didn't even know how to respond to that. So I just stared at her, into her eyes, which definitely held an intelligence far, far beyond human, as well as a certain kindness I couldn't quite understand. "Why?" I sputtered. "Why did you do this?" "Do what?" the green-haired man asked. I just laughed. I laughed hysterically. I laughed until I couldn't anymore. Then I started to cry. "You know damn well what you did," I screamed, struggling to hold back my emotions. "You destroyed everything. You consumed the entire fucking world. Are you happy now? Are you happy now that there's nothing left? What more could you greedy bastards take? Why did you have to destroy something beautiful?" The green-haired man spoke up. "There's nothing left of the forests of the Cretaceous era," he just blurted out. I couldn't see how such a statement was relevant. I just gave him a weird look, as if to say, "The fuck is that supposed to mean?" He didn't miss a beat, swiftly explaining. The Earth had gone through many different iterations throughout its history. Even in your time, 16 billion years ago, the Earth had seen its status quo upended countless times over. The Cretaceous era ended in a blaze of pain. The asteroid sent debris falling back to the Earth that heated the atmosphere to the temperature of an oven for over an hour, and the resulting smoke and ash blocked out the sun for decades in a deep freeze the likes of which humanity of your era could not have comprehended. And even when that finally let up, the Earth began warming rapidly as the ash was gone while the greenhouse gases remained. The Earth was forever changed. Never again would the dinosaurs roam the Earth. The people of your age never gave any thought to that forgotten world. You never mourned the dinosaurs. I still don't understand. We were supposed to preserve the environment, not do this. How? How can you live in a world without nature? How did this even happen? Nature is older than us, wiser than us. We depend on it. We're part of it. I just don't get why this happened. I thought we had achieved a utopia, a harmonious balance with the natural world. I was so confused and furious. It felt like everything that once was had been disrespected. You have no idea how much the things you paved over meant to people. It's like dancing on the grave of humanity and Mother Nature herself. It came out weakly. At this point, I felt so defeated. I just wanted to go back to a time before my entire world had been turned into an intergalactic parking lot. The blue-haired man smiled kindly and knowingly, as if he actually understood where I was coming from, before speaking up. People never did like the idea of an alien Earth, that you might step out of the time machine in your house, the surrounding hills, the sounds of birds chirping, and the soft white clouds above could be replaced by something completely alien, something you may find ugly or disturbing, and that an unfathomable number of people could live there and not care that your world had been upturned, that they not only paved over your grave, but sucked the atmosphere above it away and propelled it through the cosmos. And nobody gives it any more thought than we do to those Cretaceous forests, or the rocky stromatolite-ridden surface of the Archean era with a thin grey sky hanging above, one which considers oxygen a foul pollutant. It was easier for you to imagine traveling through time than replacing biology. It was easier for people in the 1960s to imagine mailing letters on rocket ships than simply sending an email. A world in which there are no rolling green hills, no farmers working the fields in the hot summer sun, no deer prancing through the forest, not even the coming of the seasons, the blue sky and sea, the wet soil under people's feet, not the forms of humans nor animals, no trace of Darwinian evolution. It was unfathomable. In all man's creative imagination, it was easier to imagine changing the laws of the universe than the laws of the earth. I just stood there, my mouth agape. He had somehow perfectly captured everything I hated about the future I had found myself in. I hated how his statement made sense, but I still couldn't shake the instinctual rejection of this world boiling up inside me. The purple-haired woman seemed to sense this, and so she commented, "I always saw it like this. People on your time had the concept of Mother Nature, with depictions varying from a caring, motherly figure of balance and harmony to a resilient and somewhat cruel old woman, always waiting to put man in his place, dishing out retribution and culling the weak, an ever-present force that restores balance and will always move on without humanity, something that inevitably reclaims and digests everything." A mere few millennia after your time, this paradigm changed rapidly, as you witnessed firsthand. Mother Nature became more like Daughter Nature, clinging shyly to the dress of Mother Technology. Technology went from being at nature's mercy, to putting nature at its mercy, to harmonizing with it, to guiding it, to surpassing it, and finally becoming indistinguishable from it. Another analogy would be to consider it Grandmother Nature, old and frail, obsolete, but still kept around, out of love. There are in fact still nature preserves, not on Earth aside from the entrance rooms for travelers such as yourself, but other planets and artificial cosmic bodies have vast reserves for various life forms from various eras and places. Some natural, some artificial, some alien. And even the amount of space ecologies like your own have is significantly expanded compared to how much they had in your time. Life became a thing that's created, not taken as a constant. Nature is now crafted with love instead of the churning crucible of evolution. Nature is a subset of civilization instead of the other way around. She finished waxing poetically and simply looked at me, patiently awaiting a response with a look of hope that she had cheered me up. Don't you think that's a bit arrogant to say? Don't you think it's hubris to suggest such a thing? I asked, feeling slightly repulsed by the casual way she had talked about dominating nature, infantilizing it, and putting it in a freaking nursing home. Hubris is a funny concept, she responded. Is it wrong to want more? Isn't that what all life has sought after since the very beginning? The only thing that kept rabbits from breeding into world domination was ecological constraints, but they absolutely would have if they could. A tree will keep growing regardless of how much life it already has. The only issue comes when someone or something tries to expand beyond their means, becoming top-heavy and vulnerable and causing harm to its surroundings. Civilization has not done such a thing. We have endured far longer than nature ever could have, spreading and preserving it beyond its own means, giving it things it never could have achieved, things that would actually have been hubris for it to consider. Nature never even preserved itself. It wasn't harmonious or stable. It even made its own form of pollution during the Great Oxygenation event. Technology, on the other hand, is far more resilient. Humans of your time were already second only to bacteria in resilience. If mammals in caves could survive the end of the dinosaurs, your geothermal bunkers certainly could. Now, civilization has encompassed all matter that could be reached at below light speed, before cosmic expansion would tear the destination away from us. And in all this vast future, baseline humanity, Homo sapiens as you know them, are still around and in the quintillions. But there is a vast world of new things beyond and intermingled with their world. My friends and I are quite archaic indeed, but we are still here. People and various other beings still live long happy lives in a world free of death, suffering, and completely at their service, and with complete control over their own personality and psychology, able to edit it at will and prevent themselves from feeling bored, going mad, or becoming spoiled and lazy. People can choose to never feel pain or any other negative sensation or emotion. They can constantly feel bliss unlike any other, and still remain capable of complex thought instead of becoming a vegetable. People can change their bodies like pairs of clothes and expand their mind at will. Nanotechnology allows for all the benefits of biochemistry in pure machinery, and anything resembling truly organic life is just purposely less efficient nanotech made as such to be a form of art. Everything is possible here. Intelligent decision has taken over unconscious evolution, much like how the inorganic world was taken over by life all those eons ago. She paused before adding, "In fact, most of the other travelers chose to stay here." "Why?" I asked. "It's not their home." "Because they were happy," the green-haired man answered bluntly. I didn't know what to say anymore. I just nodded and solemnly turned back to the time piercer, the catalyst for all this existential dread and confusion. "So, I take it you don't want to stay here?" the blue-haired man asked. I just shook my head and sat down, casting one last glance towards the incomprehensible future. I pulled the lever, feeling a sharp contrast to the feeling of adventure I had when I pulled it for the first time. This time, I just felt exhausted and miserable. The return journey took another 12 hours, and at that point, I was so utterly sleep-deprived I barely even paid attention to the journey throughout most of it. Though it was hard to miss the end in which, to my immense relief, the room gave way to the vast structure, being slowly disassembled as the shells of planetary crust above me disappeared. The gravity got replaced from a black hole to a normal planetary core. The sun reappeared, only for it to be blocked out before the fog around it quickly faded. The cities shrank down even smaller as the surface of the earth started to look at least somewhat natural again, like it was made of rock instead of organic technology. The inhabitants of the structures slowly became more and more familiar looking. The forest began to return, its bioluminescence shutting off like someone had flipped a light switch. The utopian era, as I had come to think of it, was now playing in reverse, with people slowly looking less healthy and more miserable as smokestacks appeared in the distance. A flash of violence passed by me as I spat through the invasion of my homeland by a nation desperate for some of the last oil in the world. The woods became more and more pristine. And then a group of bulldozers seemed to rush in to build a rotting house, which soon became an inhabited one, and then my own. I didn't bother to learn what happened to the chair or to myself. I simply watched as I lived a full, happy life, reassuringly seeming to have recovered from the trauma of this experience. I played through the decades to come, catching glimpses of world history, which I shall keep to myself, and watched as my future self had fewer and fewer gadgets and technologies. Then I watched a few years roll by, the change of the seasons, the oscillating white and green carpet of the forest outside. Then the next few days. Then the night ahead of me and my frantic typing at my computer. I saw the form I was writing in, and I knew what I had to do. After letting out all of the manic hysteria from that experience, however, here I am now, unsure of what to do with Time Piercer. I really feel like I've opened a Pandora's box, and my only reassurance is that it seems that the timeline has and will survive time travel. But that doesn't make its existence any less worrying. I can't help but wonder if Grandmother Nature went willingly, if it really was a peaceful merging, or a forced replacement. Did she struggle to resist and compete with us, to remain relevant, to avoid the nursing home? Did she have something to say about it all, but get silenced by mechanical hands before having her roots pulled from the earth? Did she scream in the voice of every animal that ever lived as she was dragged along a steel corridor to an unknown fate? Was it truly like the death of the dinosaurs, one in fire and ashy snow? Does it matter? They said there's even more nature now, but while it's grown in quantity, it's diminished in relevance. Not a constant, but a novelty, a curiosity. I guess in the end, everyone was happy and things turned out alright. That a world not dominated by nature isn't so bad. But then, why do I feel this melancholy? Is it like that pang of sorrow you feel when you see your old school has been demolished for an apartment building? Is it that somber feeling you have when thinking of another family moving into your home when you move away? Maybe this really isn't such a bad future. Maybe it's actually amazing in fact. Maybe it's wrong for me to feel upset about something that didn't affect the vast majority of beings that will be born in the future. Is it wrong to feel sad? To solemnly dwell on the loss, even though someone else is happy? Is it wrong to feel that the time you spent there has been disrespected? Is it wrong to feel like a ghost? Displaced